let's get into our White Sox predictions, and we're going to start with an optimistic route. And hopefully, this actually comes to fruition.
Okay.
Let's start with the best case scenario for the White Sox. I think for every Major League Baseball team, well, let's say for 20 of the 30 teams, the best case scenario is the White Sox or their teams win the World Series. What is your best case scenario, Laurence, and how do the White Sox get there to the best case scenario?
The best case scenario for the White Sox is for a majority of the season, the team stays healthy. Because really, that's what we're talking about here. And we know that a bunch of these guys have enough talent to make some stuff happen. So in the best case scenario, the players that matter for the White Sox stay healthy. They stay healthy and they are in a competitive race in the American League Central. Even though Cleveland didn't do squat, I don't think they're going anywhere. And I think that their style of play is it's akin to Ozzie Guillen talking about the Piranhas with the Twins, 15 years ago. It's that way can win, and they have an excellent manager. So that's how you win games inside the margins. So for me, it's best case scenario, everyone stays healthy, mainly Tim Anderson. And if Tim, I'm writing this for the Sun-Times, as a matter of fact, I'm finishing up my column before we got on here. If Tim Anderson, he was an all-star last year. Yay, that was kind of how the Sox clubhouse reacted when they were told that.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Remember the house? I was just like, hey, and Tim's a all-star.
Yay.
So but this version, someone said to me back in the winter, said, you watched Tim Anderson in the WBC. The word on the street was he had seen some of the money that was going around with the shortstops, and he looked and he was like, I'm as good as those guys. And he wanted to show the world. He had a really good World Baseball Classic. I think that he opened some eyes. I thought it was cool that he played second base. If the best case scenario for the White Sox is that Tim Anderson plays 130 to 140 games, and if he does, and they are relatively healthy, they will compete for the American League Central title.
And that's your best case scenario. They'll compete for the division title.
Yep.
Okay.
That is my best case scenario.
My best case scenario, the White Sox win the World Series.
Wow.
He's back.
He's back.
The best case scenario, they go 95 and 67. Grifol is a genius. Mancata, Anderson, Robert, Vaughn, Andrews all play 140-plus games. Cease, Lynn, and Giolito all make 30-plus starts. Liam Hendricks comes back in June. And the White Sox, thanks to outstanding starts from Dylan Cease and Lucas Giolito, upset the Astros in the ALCS, and they go on and win the World Series. That's my best case scenario for the White Sox in 2023. Let's get a little closer to reality. Let's talk about worst case scenario, which I nailed last year. I'm gonna have you start before I provide my worst case scenario. What do you think is the worst case scenario for the White Sox?
The worst case scenario is they are not healthy, and we see some of the injury bug pop back up inside that clubhouse. The worst case scenario is Luis Robert isn't as good as we all think he is. And some of the stuff that we saw last year continues to plague him. The worst case scenario is that as much as I love what Pedro is doing in Glendale, that doesn't always translate to Major League Ball once the games are for real. And he is overwhelmed by what he's doing and what his job is. And the White Sox finished third in the American League Central. That's the worst case scenario for me.
Worst case scenario for me, the White Sox finished 72 and 90. They're 5 games below 500 at the All-Star break before they take what is going to be the toughest week in Major League Baseball for them in 2023, where they have to go to Queens and then Atlanta. And after Atlanta, they got to go to Minneapolis. Like that's how their schedule lays out after the All-Star break. And they're 5 games below 500 at the All-Star break because April's too tough for them. Injuries pile up in May and in June. And come close to the trade deadline, the White Sox just don't see a team that could compete with Cleveland. So they trade Lucas Giolito. They trade Lance Lynn. We see a lot of Davis Martin. We see a lot of Sean Burke in August and September, and the season completely collapses on the White Sox, and they go 72-90. They barely finish ahead of the Kansas City Royals for third place in the American League Central. And we have a lot of questions about the direction of this franchise going into the offseason. A question or discussion that I think a lot of White Sox fans are just going to peace out on. Be like, I'm not ready. I don't want to talk about another rebuild. But that would be the worst case scenario for me is
I don't want to talk about another rebuild. If your doomsday scenario comes true, I don't want to talk about another rebuild with Rick doing it. Like I won't even allow that discussion to happen on my show or my pods. Like, nah, you need someone new to do that. Like, you can't ask White Sox fans to live through that again, because White Sox fans, they bought into the concept of a rebuild in a way that I didn't honestly believe. And seeing the excitement that there was for the prospects coming up and seeing White Sox fans engage, you better not do it again with the same guy. If you do it again, it better be with fresh eyes, with someone else coming in and saying, we gotta strip this thing down to the studs and start over. If they trade off pieces and end up finishing third and then try to sell you some, we're rebuilding again, with Rick being the guy that's doing the rebuilding, full-fledged White Sox fandom revolt.
and I guess they have the built-in excuse thanks to Forbes of, well, we're losing cash. This didn't work, so we got to recoup our losses in revenue, or whatever financial term Forbes referenced in their article that the White Sox were the third biggest losers when it comes to finances behind the Padres and New York Mets in Major League
They got a
Baseball.
fresh $30 million from MLB BAM Tech this offseason, so they won't lose any money this year.
Yeah, so I am really hopeful the worst case scenario does not happen
Me
from my
too.
perspective, because again, the way I see it, their schedule is really tough. It's really tough at the beginning. It gets a little easier in May and a little easier in the beginning part of June, and then I mean in July, who made this schedule? Your homestand before the All-Star break at home is Toronto and St. Louis. Then you get the All-Star break, and then you go to Atlanta, and then you go to Queens, and then you go to Minneapolis. And then you come home and you're 2 games against the Cubs, and you never know what kind of team you're going to have for the Cubs. They're going to be hyped for that match, that series. And then 4 games at home against Cleveland. And then it's the trade deadline. Like, that's the slippery slope I'm talking about. Like, if you're at 500 at that point and you trip, it's not trip, stumble, okay, we dust ourselves off, we get back up again. It's
Right.
trip, oh my gosh, we're falling off of the cliff in the Grand Canyon, and things just getting out of hand real fast. Like, that is, I would circle and say, not call it the gauntlet. That's the danger zone for the White Sox. Like, that goes either two ways. The White Sox excel, and that gives everyone confidence that they should buy the deadline. This team's making the playoffs. Or this team just completely falls apart in front of our eyes. And we saw that last year, but we saw that in late April, and the White Sox never recovered.
Nope, they never did.
Yeah. So let's go with our record prediction. So we talked about best case, we talked about worst case. I'm sure it's going to be in between. What do you got for a record prediction for the White Sox in 2023, Laurence?
I hate when you ask me this question.
You want me to? I'll start first. I'll buy you some time. I'm going to go 85-77.
Damn it. That's exactly what I was going to say.
This
I was gonna say 85 or 86 wins.
Okay. This has the makings to me of a season we've seen before, but we saw it in 2012, in which the
Oh
White
no.
Sox,
When they were in first place all the way up to like the second week of September and then fell apart.
yes, yes,
God.
Where Jim Leland got the best of Robin Ventura, brand new manager, gave him way too many players. He made things complicated for himself. That the White Sox are right there with Cleveland, leading Cleveland to September, and then Terry Francona gets the best of Pedro Grifol. And Grifol is the rookie manager, doesn't press the right buttons late in the season, and the White Sox stumble and they finish second place in the American League Central. And I don't think 85 wins is going to be enough to earn one of the wild card spots in the American League. So right now I got them 85 and 77, which would be the seventh best record in the majors, or in the American League, I should say.
All right, I'll go a step higher. So
Okay.
I'll go 86 and 76
Is that
as
good enough to make it into the postseason?
it's good enough to compete. I really hope that it's not like 2012 because that was just that just felt really awful.
Mm-hmm.
um so my hope is that they're kind of in it the whole time and they just can't get there at the end. And realistically, I actually think that that would be not okay, but I think White Sox fans would go, all right, it's at least a step in the right direction. You improved upon what you did in 2022 and onward and upward. And let's see where this thing goes from here. Let's see if they actually spend some real money in an offseason now that they're close. But 86 wins with that group feels right to me, but you always have to add the caveat of if healthy.
Right. If they stay healthy. One thing to note, I can already hear White Sox fans yelling at us about Cleveland. What about Tristan McKenzie? You
He's
guys are
hurt.
right. If McKenzie's injury is more serious than what Cleveland is letting on early in the reporting, that could really sway the favor over to the White Sox. I think Cleveland, the White Sox, and the Twins are three teams in the American League Central that could finish above 500, but I don't see any of these teams winning more than 93 games. I am expecting a close three-team race all season long, Laurence.
I think that you're right. I think that what fell into Minnesota's lap was right. You're like you have a one of the best players in the game, and oops a daisy. Now he's just back because other teams were afraid of medicals that you seemingly have had done and have looked at and said, no, he's fine. He's probably gonna be fine for the next couple of years. So they fell into being back in contention in this division. We know what Cleveland's got. Cleveland's got good pitching, a great manager, and a game plan against you every time that you play, and Jose Ramirez. Like they have all of those things. The White Sox should be able, and I hate that we have to keep talking about them this way. They should be able to generate runs at a higher pace than the other two teams in the league.
Mm-hmm.
I actually kind of like their rotation. Depending on which version of Lucas Giolito shows up this year, and if that 27 pounds or whatever he's talking about actually makes a difference in the type of velo that he's going to be able to work with and his command on his changeup, I think there's a lot there. But I'm also still trying to figure out, okay, yeah, some of those balls that Yaz hits are going to end up being singles this year. And then he's on the bases for you. Like, I'm happy that he gets hits, but I kind of want Yaz to be concentrating on hitting the ball over the fence.
Yeah.
And I know just getting him on bases is what you want overall, but he has to be, as Steve Stone would say, he has to be a run generator. Like that's what he's got to do this year. So hopefully he can do that.